The water in the pool was the wrong color on the third afternoon, and I am the one who saw it first. And I did not say anything. I want to put that down before I put anything else down. The pool was not red, and it was not green, and it was not anything that would have made a normal person stop walking. It was the wrong shade of blue. It was the color a swimming pool turns when the chlorine has been off for about a day, that flat, dead blue that has no light in it. And I noticed it from the second floor walkway above the courtyard, and I kept walking, because I was carrying a tray of glasses back to the bar, and because I was already late, and because the resort had 3 pools, and the courtyard pool was not the one the guests cared about, and because if I had stopped to say something, I would have had to find a manager to say it to. And the manager I would have had to find was Henrik, and I did not want to find Henrik. That was the whole of my reason. I did not want to find Henrik. That is the size of the thing that started it. My name, for purposes of this, is Marisol. I'm 26 years old. 2 years ago, in the season I am going to tell you about, I was a server at an all-inclusive beach resort on the southern coast of an island I will not name, because the resort is still there under a different name, and I do not want to make trouble for the people who still work there. The resort had 412 rooms, 3 pools, 2 beaches that were really 1 beach with a rock jetty between them, 4 restaurants, 6 bars counting the swim-up bars, and a staff of around 340 when the season was full. I had been there for a year and a half. I had taken the job because my mother had been sick for a long time, and because the resort job paid in a currency that was worth twice what the equivalent job paid in the city where I had grown up, and because the resort housed its staff in a dormitory complex behind the kitchens, which meant I did not have to pay rent. I sent most of my pay home. My mother used most of it for medicine, and she put the rest in a jar in her kitchen, and she told me every time we spoke on the phone that the jar was getting heavier. I want to tell you that this was true. I want to tell you that the jar existed and that it was getting heavier. I do not know if it did. My mother told me a great many things in those months that I now think were things she said because she wanted them to be true. And I was on an island, and I could not check. The reason I am telling you about my mother is not because she is in the story. She is not. She was on the mainland the entire time, and she is still on the mainland. And she is still alive, as far as I know, although I have not spoken to her in 9 months. The reason I am telling you about my mother is because she is why I did not leave the resort when I could have left. I want to be honest about that from the beginning. I had reasons. The reasons were not bad reasons. The reasons were reasons that a person could make peace with in the small hours of the morning when they were trying to make peace with the fact that they had stayed when they should have gone. I made peace with my reasons many times. I am still making peace with them. The work itself was the work. I came on at 11 in the morning, and I worked through the lunch rush at the main buffet, in the afternoon at the pool bar on the east side, and the dinner shift at the a la carte restaurant on the west side, and I went off at 11 at night, with a half-hour break in the middle that I usually spent in the staff canteen behind the kitchens, eating whatever the kitchen staff had set aside for us, which was usually rice and beans and whatever protein had not moved that day at the guest buffet. I had a uniform, which was a white polo shirt with the resort's logo on the breast, and a pair of black shorts, and a pair of black canvas shoes that had to be replaced every 3 months, because the chlorine from the pool decks ate the rubber on the soles. I had a name tag that said my name, and underneath my name said hospitality in smaller letters. I had a magnetic key card that opened the staff doors in the back hallways, in the dormitory, and nothing else. I did not have a key to any guest room, which I want to mention because it becomes important later. The room keys were held by housekeeping and by the front desk and by the resident manager, who was Henrik, and by no one else. Henrik had been at the resort for, I was told, 11 years. He was a man in his early 50s, tall and pale, in a way that did not seem entirely possible for someone who had lived in the tropics for 11 years, with very short gray hair and the kind of soft voice that managers use when they want you to lean in to hear them. Because leaning in is a small submission, and the lean is the lesson, not the words. Henrik was correct with the staff, and he was warm with the guests, and he had the kind of competence that you could not point to a single instance of, but that everyone on the property knew was real. The resort ran the way it ran because Henrik ran it. The supply chain to the kitchens, the schedule for the housekeeping rotation, the contracts with the dive boat operator and the offshore fishing charter and the bus company that ran the airport transfers, the relationship with the island's health inspector, who came twice a year and who left with 2 bottles of good rum and a clean report. All of that was Henrik. I had spoken to him maybe a dozen times in a year and a half. He knew my name. He knew everyone's name. That was one of the things he did. The reason I did not want to find Henrik on the 3rd afternoon, the afternoon of the wrong color pool, was something that had happened the previous morning, which I am going to tell you about now. The previous morning, I had been setting up the breakfast buffet at 6:15, which was my responsibility on the days I drew the early shift, and I had been carrying a tray of butter dishes out of the kitchen toward the cold station, and I had come through the swinging door from the kitchen to the back of the buffet, and I had nearly walked into Henrik, who was standing in the hallway with another man I did not know, talking in a low voice. They had stopped talking when I came through the door. Henrik had smiled at me, the small, correct smile he gave the staff, and had stepped aside to let me past, and had not resumed talking until I was out of the hallway. The man with him was not a guest. He was not in resort clothes. He was wearing a pale gray collared shirt and dark trousers, and the kind of brown leather shoes that no one on the island wore, because the island was hot and humid, and the leather rotted on your feet within a season. He had been holding a black plastic case, the size of a large lunchbox, with metal latches on the front and a small handle on the top. He had been holding it with both hands, low, the way you hold something that is heavier than it looks. I had seen him for maybe 3 seconds. I had not thought about it again until that night when I was lying on my bunk in the dormitory, and I had remembered, the way you remember a thing while you are falling asleep, that the man's shoes had been wet at the toes, the way shoes get wet when they have been walked through grass that has dew on it, even though it was June and there had been no rain for 3 weeks, and the lawns at the resort were watered only at 4 in the morning, which was an hour and a half before I had seen him. That was the warning. I want to mark it clearly. The warning was not a phone call. The warning was not a piece of paper. The warning was a pair of wet leather shoes on a man in a dry hallway at 6:15 in the morning, and I had seen it, and I had not understood what I was seeing, and I'd let it sit at the edge of my thinking until the 3rd afternoon, when I saw the wrong color in the courtyard pool, and the 2 pieces of information met in the middle of my chest, and made a small bad feeling there. And even then, I did not stop walking. I carried the tray to the bar. I delivered it. I went back to my station. I worked the rest of my shift. I want to describe the courtyard before I go further, because the courtyard becomes important. The courtyard pool was in the center of a U-shape made by the original 1970s wing of the resort, which had 3 floors of guest rooms on 3 sides, and an open mouth on the 4th side that looked out toward the gardens. The pool was small, by the standards of the resort, maybe 40 feet long and 20 wide, with a shallow end and a deep end and a set of tile steps at the corner. It had been built first, when the resort was a smaller hotel under a different owner, and it was the least used of the 3 pools, because it had no bar and no swim-up and no view of the ocean. It was used mostly by the older guests who wanted to read in the shade, and by the families with very small children who wanted somewhere quiet to put their toddlers in the water. There were 2 staff members assigned to the courtyard during the day, a lifeguard whose name was Roman, and a pool attendant whose name was Kala, and both of them were friends of mine. In the way that you become friends with people you see for 10 hours a day in the same uniform. Roman was 21 and had come to the resort from a town inland on the same island, and Kala was 28 and had come from a different island farther north, and the 2 of them had been together as a couple for about 6 months, which was something we were not supposed to do. Staff with staff, but which everyone did, and which Henrik knew about and pretended not to know about, because the alternative was to fire half the staff every quarter. The wrong color in the pool, when I noticed it from the walkway, was something I should have asked Roman about, because Roman would have noticed it before I did. Roman was the kind of lifeguard who actually watched the pool. He sat in the white plastic chair at the corner of the deep end, and he watched, and he kept the chlorine test kit at his feet, and he tested every 2 hours, and he wrote the readings on the clipboard hung on the back of the chair, and he reported anything outside of the acceptable range to Henrik directly. The pool that afternoon should not have been the color I was seeing. If the pool was that color, Roman should have noticed before I had. I should have looked down into the courtyard from the walkway when I noticed the color, and I should have seen Roman in his chair, and I should have caught his eye, and I should have made the small gesture that we use between staff that meant something is off, and he should have nodded back, and that should have been the end of it. That is what should have happened. What actually happened is I looked down into the courtyard, and I did not see Roman. The chair was there. The clipboard was hanging on the back of it. The chair was empty. There was a guest in the pool, an older woman doing slow laps in the shallow end, and there were 2 empty lounge chairs on the deck with towels folded on them, and there was no Roman and no Kala. I noticed it. I logged it in the back of my head, the way you log small staffing anomalies when you are carrying a tray of dirty glasses through a service walkway and you are late. I told myself that Roman was in the staff washroom and that Kala was at the linen station. I told myself this without checking and without slowing down. I carried the tray to the bar. I unloaded it. I went back to my station at the buffet. I did not go back to the walkway to look down at the pool again. I want to talk now about what I had been hearing in the dormitory, because the dormitory is where the rumors lived, and the rumors had been getting louder for about a week. And I had been telling myself the rumors were rumors, because rumors are what you tell yourself rumors are. The dormitory was a long 2-story building behind the main kitchen complex, with 2 big shared rooms on each floor, 20 bunks to a room, men on the ground floor and women on the second. I shared my room with 19 other women, most of whom were servers and housekeepers and bartenders, and we lived in a kind of permanent, low-grade conversation that ran from the moment the first of us came off shift in the afternoon to the moment the last of us came off shift at midnight. The conversation was about what conversations of women living in dormitories are about. It was about home and about money and about the men we were sleeping with and the men we were not sleeping with, and about which managers were tolerable and which were not, and about the food in the staff canteen, and about who was pregnant and who was thinking about leaving and who had left. In the week before the wrong color pool, The conversation had also been about 3 other things, and I want to give them to you in the order I heard them. The first was the well. The resort drew its drinking water from a deep well on the property, which had been drilled in the 1980s, and which fed a treatment plant behind the laundry, and which was the source of all the water that came out of the taps in the guest rooms, and in the kitchens, and in our dormitory, 6 days before the wrong color pool. A housekeeper named Inez had said, in the dormitory, that one of the maintenance men had told her that the well had been pulling slow all week, and that the pumps had been running longer than they should to fill the holding tank, and that the maintenance crew had been told by Henrik not to bring the issue to the corporate office because it was a routine fluctuation and would resolve itself. Inez had said this in the way that gossip gets passed, with a shrug, with a small laugh at the end. I had not thought about it. The second was the dive boat. 5 days before the wrong color pool, the dive boat that the resort contracted with had not come in for its scheduled morning run. The dive boat came in at 6 every morning to pick up guests for the early reef tour, and on that morning it had not come. And the guests had been told that the captain was unwell, and a different boat from a different operator had been hired for the day. The next morning, the same thing. And the next. By the time I noticed the wrong color pool, the original dive boat had not run for 4 days, and the substitute boats had been from 3 different operators, which was unusual because the resort had an exclusive contract with the original operator, and breaking that contract for 1 day was something that required Enric's approval, and breaking it for 4 days in a row was something that should have required a memo to the corporate office. And as far as anyone in the dormitory had heard, no memo had gone out. The captain of the original boat lived in the village on the other side of the headland from the resort, and one of the bartenders, whose name was Darrow, and whose cousin lived in that village, had said that the captain was not unwell, that the captain had been seen in the village on the day he was supposed to be ill, that the captain had been told by Henrik not to make the run for a week, and had been paid for the missed days in cash. The third was the supplies. 3 days before the wrong color pool, the kitchen had received a delivery that was twice the size of its normal weekly delivery. The delivery had come at night, from a truck that did not have the markings of the resort's usual supplier. The kitchen staff had been told to log the delivery under the usual supplier's account, and to store half of it in the dry goods warehouse behind the laundry, rather than in the kitchen's own storerooms. The dry goods warehouse was a building that none of the kitchen staff worked in, which was usually used for cleaning supplies and linen overflow, in which the kitchen staff had not previously been told to deliver food to. One of the line cooks, a man named Bruno, had mentioned this in the staff canteen on the same evening, while we were all eating rice and beans, and had said it the way you say a thing that is mildly interesting. I had been eating across from him. I had nodded. I had not thought about it again. The well was slow. The dive boat was not running. The kitchen had taken delivery of twice the usual food and had stored half of it somewhere unusual. A man in dry leather shoes that were wet at the toes had been in a back hallway with Henrik at 6:15 in the morning. The pool in the courtyard was the wrong color. Roman was not in his chair. I want to tell you that these things connected for me in some clean and observable moment, and I cannot, because they did not. They sat in my head separately, the way the things you do not want to think about sit in your head separately, each in its own room, and the rooms did not have doors between them. I want to tell you why. The reason is that the resort was a place that ran on a particular kind of pretending. The guests pretended they were not the guests they were. The staff pretended the work was not the work it was. The managers pretended the place was the kind of place it was advertised to be. The pretending was the product. If you started connecting the things you noticed, you were no longer pretending. And if you were no longer pretending, you were no longer useful. And if you were no longer useful, the housing went away. And if the housing went away, the money you were sending home went away, and the jar in your mother's kitchen stopped getting heavier. The pretending was the rent, so I did not connect them. I went back to my station. I worked the rest of the lunch shift. I went to the staff canteen at 3 for my half-hour break. I sat at the long table with Calla, who had come into the canteen at the same time I had, who looked the way she always looked. I asked her where Roman was. She said he had taken the afternoon off. I asked her why. She said he had not been feeling well. I asked her if it was something he had eaten. She looked at me for what was longer than the question needed, and she said, "No, it is not something he has eaten. It is just a stomach thing. He will be back tomorrow." She said it in the voice you use when you have already decided what you are going to say, and you are saying it whether or not it is the answer to the question. She finished her tea. She got up. She said she had to get back to the linen station. She left. I sat in the canteen for the rest of my break. I did not finish my food. I thought about the wrong color in the pool, and I thought about the wet leather shoes. And I thought about Calla's voice, which had been wrong in a way I could not name. The way the pool had been the wrong color in a way I could not have named without a chemistry kit. The voice had been Calla's voice. The words had been the kind of words she would have said. The voice had been wrong. It had been a half-second slower than her normal voice. It had been a half-tone flatter. It had been the voice of a person reading from a small script that had been handed to her in the moment and that she had agreed to read. I went back to my afternoon shift. I worked the pool bar on the east side, which was the busy one, with the swim up and the music and the noise. I made drinks. I smiled. I made conversation with the regulars I had been making conversation with for the week they had been on the property. One of them, an older man from somewhere cold, who had been at the bar every afternoon for 6 days, and who had tipped me well, and who had told me about his grandchildren in more detail than I needed, asked me a question. He asked me when the next dive boat was going out. I told him I would have to check. I told him I would let him know. He nodded. He said, "No rush. My wife and I were going to do the morning reef tour, but they keep telling us the boat isn't running, and we've been here a week, and we've been wanting to do that reef tour the whole time, and they keep telling us it will be tomorrow." He laughed. He said, "I'm starting to think the reef isn't out there." I laughed too, the way you laugh at a joke a regular makes, and I told him I would check on the boat in the morning. He said thank you. He went back to his drink. What he had said sat in my head for the rest of the afternoon. The reef isn't out there. He had said it as a joke. He had meant nothing by it. What I heard, when I replayed it in my head while I made drinks and smiled and emptied the ice bins, was something he had not meant. The reef was, of course, out there. The reef was the reef. The reef had been there for thousands of years. What was not out there, what had not been out there for 4 days, was the boat that took people to it. And what was strange about the boat not being out there was not just that the boat was not running. What was strange was that the substitute boats, the ones from the 3 other operators, had also stopped running 2 days before, and that the morning reef tour for the past 2 days had been quietly converted on the activities board at the lobby to a poolside snorkeling lesson. The lesson was held in the main pool on the south side of the resort. It was led by Calla. I had walked past it that morning on my way to set up the lunch buffet, and I had seen Calla in the water with a small group of guests, holding up a mask and a snorkel and demonstrating the seal. and I had not thought anything of it, because it was the kind of activity that the resort ran on bad weather days, when the boats could not go out. The weather had been fine for 4 days. The weather had been fine the whole week. I want to be honest about the way these things were arriving in my head. They were arriving like furniture. Each one was a piece of furniture being carried into a room by a person I could not see. And each piece was being set down in the room, and the room was getting fuller. And I was not turning around to look at the room, because I was at the bar making drinks. I was hearing the furniture being set down behind me. I was not looking. I was making drinks. At 8 o'clock that evening, I came off the pool bar and I had my dinner shift at the a la carte restaurant on the west side. The a la carte was the place where the guests went when they wanted to feel like the resort was a real restaurant, with tablecloths and a wine list and a maitre d' who walked you to your table. I was on the floor that night, taking orders, running plates, smiling. The restaurant was full. It was always full. The dinner service ran the same way it always ran. The kitchen sent the food out. The food was good. The wine was poured. The guests were happy. Nothing about the dinner service was wrong. Nothing about the dinner service was wrong, and that is the thing I want you to understand. The dinner service was completely normal. The lights were on. The kitchen was running. The waitstaff was running. The guests were eating. The bill was being printed at the end of each meal and signed to the room. Everything in that restaurant, for the entire 3 hours of dinner service, was exactly as it should have been. And the whole time I was in there, I could feel the room behind me filling up with furniture, and I could not turn around, and I could not put down the tray. At 9:45 during the second seating, I went into the kitchen to pick up an order, and the kitchen was not the kitchen. I want to be careful here. The kitchen was running. The line was working. The expediter, whose name was Felix, was calling tickets the way he always called tickets. The food was on the pass. What was different was the staff. There were 3 people I did not know on the line. They were in the right uniforms. They had the right aprons and the right shoes and the right hairnets. They were doing the work. They were doing the work correctly. They were not 3 of the line cooks I had been working alongside for a year and a half. They were 3 other people. Bruno, the line cook, who had told me about the night delivery, was not on the line. The fish cook, whose name was Tepa, was not on the line. The grill cook, whose name was Asher, was not on the line. 3 people I had never seen before were on the line in their places, doing their jobs, in the right uniforms, at the right speed, and no one in the kitchen was saying anything about it. I picked up my order. I stood at the pass with my tray in my hands, and I looked at Felix, who looked at me, and I made the small face that meant, "Where are the others?" And Felix looked back at me with a face that did not change at all. He said, behind me, "2 of you on table 14, and the other waiter at the pass picked up his tray and went, and Felix turned to the next ticket. I stood at the pass. I said, 'Felix.' I said it quietly. He looked up. He said, 'What?' I said, 'Where's Tepa?' He said, 'Tepa is off tonight.' I said, 'Since when is Tepa off on a Wednesday?' He said, 'Since tonight, Marisol, pick up your food. You have a table waiting.' He said it in the same voice Kala had used in the canteen, the voice that was reading. I picked up my food. I went back out onto the floor. I ran the plates to my table. I smiled. I refilled the wine. I went back to the pass. I picked up the next order. I ran it. I did this for the rest of the seating. I did not say anything to anyone. I did not look at the 3 new people on the line. I did not look at Felix. I worked the floor and I smiled, and I refilled wine, and I cleared plates, and I closed out my tables. And at 10:45, the dinner service ended, and the last of the guests left the restaurant, and the maitre d' locked the front doors of the a la carte from the inside, which I had never seen him do at the end of dinner service before. I went into the back hallway behind the kitchen. The back hallway connected the a la carte to the main kitchen complex by way of a long service corridor that the guests never saw. I went down the corridor. I had to go past the dry goods warehouse behind the laundry on my way back to the dormitory. The warehouse had a roll-up door at one end and a normal door at the other end, and the normal door was on the corridor I was walking down. The normal door was usually closed. The normal door was, in fact, kept locked at all times except during deliveries, and the only people with the key were Henrik and the head of housekeeping and the warehouse manager, and I did not have a key. As I walked past the door, I saw that it was open. It was open about 4 inches. There was light inside. I should not have stopped. I want to tell you that I knew I should not have stopped, and that I stopped anyway, because the truth is that I had been looking for the whole shift for one thing I could touch with my hands. The wrong color in the pool was not something I could touch with my hands. The voice on Calla had not been something I could touch with my hands. The 3 strangers on the line had not been something I could touch with my hands. The open door with the light inside was something I could touch with my hands. I stopped. I put my hand on the door. I pushed it open another 4 inches. I looked inside. I want to describe what I saw, and I want to do it in the right order, the order I saw it in, because the order is the only thing I have. I saw, first, the row of metal shelving that ran along the wall opposite the door. The shelving was the shelving I had expected to see, because I had been told the warehouse was used for cleaning supplies and linen overflow, and there were boxes of cleaning supplies on the lower shelves and stacks of folded linen on the upper shelves. I saw, second, in the middle of the warehouse floor, a large stack of cardboard boxes that had not been there before. The boxes that the kitchen staff had been told to store there 3 nights earlier, the night delivery. The boxes were labeled in a language I could read, and the labels said the names of foods, dry goods, rice and flour and sugar and powdered milk, and canned beans and canned tomatoes, and canned tuna, and instant coffee and bottled water. The labels said these things in printed letters on shipping stickers. I saw, third, against the far wall, behind the stack of boxes, a row of larger objects under blue tarpaulins. The tarpaulins were tied down at the corners, with roped small metal rings set into the concrete floor. The shapes under the tarpaulins were the shapes of generators and of large fuel drums, and of what I think now were oxygen tanks, although I did not know what oxygen tanks looked like at the time, and I am reconstructing. I saw, fourth, sitting on a small folding table next to the row of shapes under tarpaulins, a clipboard. The clipboard had a printed sheet on it. The sheet was a list. The list had names on it. The names were the names of staff at the resort. I could see, even from the door, even at 4 inches of opening, that the list was long. I could see, at the top of the list, the word staff manifest. I could see below that 3 columns, with names in the left column and dates in the middle column, and a single letter in the right column. And the letter in the right column was the same letter for every name I could see from the door, although I could not read the letter from where I stood. I saw, fifth, standing at the small folding table with his hand on the clipboard, the man in the pale gray collared shirt and the dark trousers and the brown leather shoes. He was alone in the warehouse. He had a pen in his hand. He was making a mark on the clipboard. He had not yet looked up. I stepped back from the door. I did it slowly. I put my hand against the wall of the corridor to steady myself, because my legs had gone soft in a way I had not felt them go soft before. I walked, slowly, the way you walk in a place where any sound will turn ahead, down the corridor away from the warehouse door. I did not run. I did not breathe out until I was around the corner, at the end of the corridor, and out of sight of the door. I stood with my back against the wall, and I breathed. I thought about the list. I thought about the letter in the right column. I thought about whether my name was on the list. I thought about which letter would be next to my name. I thought about the fact that I had no way to know either of those things without going back to the warehouse and looking at the list, and that I could not go back to the warehouse because the man with the pen was there, and that I could not ask anyone what was on the list because I did not know who in this building was still the person they appeared to be and who was reading from a small script that had been handed to them. I thought about Kala in the canteen and about Felix at the pass and about the 3 strangers on the line. I thought about Roman, who had taken the afternoon off. I thought about whether Roman had taken the afternoon off because Roman had been told to. I thought about whether Roman was somewhere on the property, in a room I did not have a key to, with a letter next to his name. I walked the rest of the way back to the dormitory. I went up the stairs to the 2nd floor. I went into the women's room. The lights were off. Most of my roommates were asleep. A few were still awake, reading by phone light in their bunks. I went to my bunk, which was on the lower row by the window. I sat down on it. I did not undress. I sat on my bunk in my uniform, and I looked across the room at the door of the dormitory, which had a chain lock on the inside that we never used. And I thought, for the first time clearly, the sentence that I had been trying not to think for the entire week. The sentence was that something was going to happen at this resort, and that the people who knew it was going to happen had been preparing for it for at least a week, and that they had been preparing without telling anyone who was not on their list, and that the people who were not on their list were the guests, and the staff who were not on their list. And I did not know which list I was on, and I did not know what was going to happen, and I did not know when. And I was on an island, and the only boat that ran from the village on the other side of the headland was the dive boat, and the dive boat had not been running for 4 days. I sat on my bunk. The window above me was open. I could hear the cicadas in the gardens outside, and I could hear, very faintly, the sound of music from the main pool bar, which closed at midnight. And I could hear, from somewhere on the property, the sound of a vehicle. The vehicle was a heavy one. The vehicle was not a vehicle that ran on the property at this hour. The vehicle was being driven slowly, with its engine at a low, even pitch, somewhere on the back service road that ran behind the dormitory and connected the kitchen complex to the dry goods warehouse. I listened to the vehicle. The vehicle stopped. I heard the parking brake set. I heard the engine cut. I heard, a moment later, a door open and close, and a second door open and close, and the sound of boots on the gravel. And then the boots stopped, and the night was quiet again, except for the cicadas, except for the music, except for my own breath in my own chest, which was loud, which was much too loud, which I could not get to be quiet, no matter how slowly I tried to breathe. I sat on my bunk until my breath was quiet again, and then I did the first thing I had done that was deliberate since the moment I had seen the clipboard. I took off my shoes. The shoes were the black canvas resort shoes, with the chlorine-eaten soles, and they squeaked on the polished floor of the corridor between the dormitory rooms. I took them off, and I held them in one hand, and I walked in my socks across the dormitory room to the bunk on the far side where my friend Peta slept. Peta was a server like me. She had come to the resort 8 months after I had, from a village on the same mainland I had come from, and she had latched onto me in the first week, the way a younger sister latches on to an older sister. And I had let her, because I had been lonely, and because she was easy to like, and because she made me laugh in a way that the long shifts needed. Peta was 22. She was asleep when I came up to her bunk, on her side with her face toward the wall, and I touched her shoulder, gently, and I put my hand over her mouth before she could make a sound, and her eyes opened in the dark, and she looked at me, and I shook my head once, and I took my hand away. She did not make a sound. She sat up. I motioned her to follow me. We went out of the dormitory room and down the stairs and out the back door of the dormitory into the small concrete yard behind the building where the staff hung laundry to dry. And we stood there in the dark in our socks, and I told her what I'd seen. I told her about the warehouse and the boxes and the tarpaulins and the man in the gray shirt and the clipboard with the list. I told her about Calla's voice in the canteen and the 3 strangers in the kitchen and the dive boat that was not running. I told her about the wet leather shoes I had seen in the man at 6:15 in the morning. I told her about the vehicle I had just heard on the back service road. I told her all of it in maybe 4 minutes, in a whisper, while we stood with our backs against the rough plaster wall of the dormitory and looked across the laundry yard at the dark windows of the kitchen complex. Peta did not say anything for a long time after I stopped talking. I want to be honest about how long. I would say it was a minute. It was long enough that I started to think she had not believed me, and I started to think about how I would convince her, and I started to make the list in my head of the things I could say. And then she said, in a voice that was very small, the list of staff. "Were you on it?" I said I did not know. I said I had not been able to see the list close up. She said, "I want to see the list." I said no. She said, "Marisol, I want to see the list. I want to know if I am on it. I want to know what the letter is. I have to know." I said, "Peta, you cannot see the list. The man is in the warehouse. The list is in the warehouse. The warehouse is locked at all hours except when it is open, and it is only open right now because the man with the pen is in it. And you cannot go into a room where the man with the pen is. You cannot. Listen to me. You cannot." She said, "Then how do we know?" I said, "We do not know." She said, "What do we do?" I said, "I do not know that either." We stood in the laundry yard for a while. The cicadas were loud. The night was warm, and the air was thick with humidity and the smell of bougainvillea from the garden on the other side of the kitchen complex. From very far away, I could hear the surf on the main beach, the small, constant sound that the resort had been built around, the sound that was on any other night I had ever spent on the property, the most important sound on the property. I could not hear the vehicle anymore. I could not hear the boots. I could hear faintly the music from the main pool bar, which meant it was not yet midnight. Peta said, into the dark, "What is in the boxes?" I said, "Food. The boxes are food." She said, "What is under the tarpaulins?" I said, "I think generators and fuel, and I think there were oxygen tanks. I'm not sure about the oxygen tanks." She said, "How many of the boxes?" I said, "A lot. Maybe 200 boxes. Maybe more, I do not know." they were stacked. She said, 200 boxes of food is not a week of food for a resort with 400 rooms. I said, no, it is not. She said, it is a month of food for maybe 40 people. I said, yes. She said, the staff manifest has how many names on it? I said, I do not know. The list was long. I could see, from the door, maybe 40 names. I could not see the bottom of the list. We looked at each other in the dark. Peta's face in the dark from that distance was just the shape of a face, with the small, wet places where her eyes were. She said, Marisol, there are 340 staff on this property. I said, I know. She said, and 412 rooms. I said, I know. She said, and the food is for 40 people. I said, I know. She said, and I want to know if I am on the list. I said, Peta, I do too. But you cannot see the list. She said, then we have to leave. Tonight. Now. I want to tell you what I felt when she said that. I felt a kind of relief, because she had said the sentence I had not been able to say, and I felt also a small angry thing because she had said it without thinking about it, in the way that a younger sister will sometimes say a sentence that her older sister has been holding in her mouth for an hour without saying. I felt the relief and the anger at the same time, and the two of them canceled out, and what was left was the practical question. The practical question was how. Peta and I were two women in our socks in a laundry yard on the backside of a resort, on an island, with no boat that we could legally take, with no car, with no way to walk off the property except through the front gate, which was manned at all hours by security, who would write down anything they saw, who would ask us where we were going at midnight in our uniforms. I said, where do we go? She said, the village on the other side of the headland. I said, the village is 6 kilometers. The road is along the cliff. There is no path that does not go past the front gate. She said, the beach. We walk along the beach. The rock jetty between the two beaches has a path around the end of it at low tide. The tide is low at midnight. I checked yesterday. I was going to go swimming with Darrow after his shift. We can walk around the jetty and along the next beach and over the headland on the goat path and into the village. It will take 3 hours. We can be there by 3 in the morning. She said it the way she said everything. Fast, certain, with the small confidence of a 22-year-old who has not yet been told no by enough things. I want to tell you that I weighed the plan carefully. I did not. I looked at her in the dark, and I thought about my own hesitations, about the wet leather shoes I had seen and not reported, about the wrong color in the pool I had not stopped to look at, about all of the small not actings of the past week. And I made the calculation that the only way to make up for the not actings was to act now, even on a plan that was not a good plan, because the alternative was to stay on the property and to find out, in some way I could not predict, what the letter next to my name was. I said yes. I said, we go now. We do not pack. We do not go back into the room. We go now. We walk to the beach. We go around the jetty. We are in the village by 3. From the village, we get a ride or we hide until morning. And in the morning, we take the village ferry to the mainland. She said, what about everyone else? I said, Peta. She said, what about everyone else? There are 340 of us in this dormitory complex. There are guests in 400 rooms. We are going to walk to the village and leave all of them here. I said, Peta, we cannot warn them. We cannot. If we go room to room, we will be stopped before we have done 2 rooms. If we wake the dormitory and start shouting, we will be in the kitchen courtyard with the security staff in 5 minutes. We are 2 women in our socks. We are not the people who save anyone. We are the people who get to the village by 3 in the morning if we leave now. She did not say anything. She looked at me. She nodded after a while. I could see in the dark that she was crying, in the silent way that a person cries when they have decided that crying loud is not available to them. I was crying too. I did not realize it until I felt the wet on my own face. We went back into the dormitory the way we had come out, up the stairs in our socks, into the room. We put our shoes on at our bunks, sitting on the edges of the mattresses, slowly, not making the small squeak that the shoes made. I took my wallet from under my pillow, with my ID card and the small folded paper money I kept in it. Peta took hers from her bunk. We did not take our phones. The phones were registered with the resort Wi-Fi, and the resort Wi-Fi was a closed network, and I did not know what the resort could see from the network, and I had a small bad feeling about leaving with the phone in my pocket. We left the phones on the bunks. We went back out into the corridor. I want to tell you what I did next, because I have thought about it many times, and I want to put it down honestly. I walked down the corridor to the bunk where my friend Inez slept, the housekeeper who had told us about the well, and I stood by her bunk for a moment, and I looked at her sleeping face, and I did not wake her. I walked to the bunk where Bruno's girlfriend slept, whose name was Selma, and I stood by her bunk for a moment, and I looked at her sleeping face, and I did not wake her. I walked past the bunks of 4 other women I knew well, women I had eaten with in the canteen for 1.5 years, and I did not wake any of them. I went to the door of the dormitory room, and I opened it, and I went out into the stairwell, and I went down the stairs. I want to be clear about what I was doing. I was not unable to wake them. I was choosing not to wake them. I was choosing not to wake them, because waking 16 women in a dormitory room at midnight in order to give them a piece of information that I could not prove, and that would have made them ask me questions I did not have time to answer, would have meant that I did not leave by the back beach, and that I did not get to the village by 3. I had made the calculation in the laundry yard, and I was now executing it. The calculation included the calculation about my friends. The calculation had decided that I did not warn them. The calculation had been made by me. I knew it was being made, and I made it anyway. I want to put that on this record. The reason Inez and Selma and the 4 other women I walked past were not warned was that I, Marisol, decided not to warn them. Peta was behind me, on the stairs, and Peta would have warned them if I had told her to, because Peta was 22 and had not yet learned to make the calculation I had just made, and I did not tell her to. I led her down the stairs and out of the dormitory and across the laundry yard and around the side of the kitchen complex and down the path that led from the staff area to the back of the gardens. I led her past the bougainvillea and past the small staff smoking patio and out onto the lawn that ran down toward the courtyard pool and the original wing of the resort. I led her with my hand on her wrist because she had stopped on the laundry yard side of the kitchen, and I had felt her stop. And I had not let her stop, because if she stopped, she would say something I did not want to hear. We came out behind the original wing of the resort, and we cut across the lawn toward the path that led to the main beach. The lawn was dark. The path lights had been turned off at 11, which was normal. The original wing was 3 floors of dark windows on our right. There were lights on in maybe a quarter of the rooms. The lights were the kind of lights people leave on when they are sleeping. The small bathroom lights or the bedside lamps. The windows were closed. The air conditioners were humming. As we passed the courtyard, I looked at the pool. The pool was the wrong color, in a way that even the moonlight made plain now. The flat, dead blue, deeper than it had been in the afternoon. The lounge chairs were stacked at the side of the deck, the way the staff stacked them at the end of the day, with the towels folded on top, which was wrong because Roman had not been there to stack them, because Roman had been off. The pool had not been stacked. Someone had stacked them after Roman had gone off. The clipboard was no longer hanging on the back of the lifeguard chair. The lifeguard chair itself had been moved out of its place at the corner of the deep end and pushed against the wall by the gate. I noted it. I did not stop. We kept walking. We came onto the main beach path. The main beach was a long curve of sand, maybe 400 meters end to end, with the Staff Beach Club at the near end and the rock jetty at the far end, and the second beach, the smaller one beyond the jetty. The sand was warm under our shoes. The surf was small. The moon was not full, but it was bright enough to see by. We took our shoes off again, because the shoes squeaked on the wet sand, and we walked along the wet line at the edge of the water, where the sand was firm. I held my shoes in one hand. Peta held hers in the other. We did not talk. We were maybe halfway down the beach, between the Staff Beach Club and the jetty, when I saw the lights out on the water. I want to describe them carefully. They were 3 lights. They were not close together, and they were not far apart. They were arranged in a rough triangle. They were maybe 2 kilometers offshore. They were the kind of lights that a boat at anchor will show, but a boat at anchor in the open water at midnight, with no other boats around, in waters where the dive boats and the fishing charters did not anchor overnight, because there was no good anchorage on this side of the headland. The lights did not move. They held their triangle. They were not navigation lights. Navigation lights are red and green and white in a specific arrangement on a moving boat. These 3 lights were all white, and they were not on a boat that was moving. They were on 3 boats, or on 1 large boat, that were holding station offshore. I stopped walking. Peta stopped beside me. She saw the lights. She did not say anything. We stood at the edge of the surf, and we looked out at the 3 lights, and I understood, in a way I had not understood in the laundry yard, that the resort was not the inside of the situation. The resort was a part of a situation that was larger than the resort, that included the boats offshore and the captain of the dive boat in his village, and the substitute boats from the 3 other operators, and the man with the brown leather shoes and his case, and the warehouse with its boxes and tarpaulins, and the staff manifest with its letter in the right column. The resort was a piece of furniture inside a room. The room was the island. The room was the sea around the island. The room was something I could not see the walls of from where I was standing on the sand. I want to tell you what I thought about, standing at the edge of the surf with my shoes in my hand. I thought about my mother on the mainland in her kitchen with the jar. I thought about whether I should have called her 3 days ago when I noticed the wet leather shoes and told her something I could not have told her because I had not understood what I was telling her. I thought about whether she was, at this moment, asleep or awake, or sitting up in her bed listening to a radio she kept on the nightstand. I thought about whether the radio she kept on the nightstand was, at this moment, saying anything she would have a use for. I thought about whether I would speak to her again. I thought about the fact that the answer to that last question was not any more the obvious yes that it had been an hour ago. Peta said, into the dark, "Are those Navy?" I said, "I do not know." She said, "Are those police?" I said, "I do not know." She said, "Are those help?" I said, "Peta, I do not know." She said, "Do we signal them?" I said, "No." She said, "Why not?" I said, "Because we do not know whose lights those are, and we do not know whether the man in the warehouse with the clipboard is on those lights or not on those lights. And we do not know whether the substitute dive boats that have been coming into the resort for 4 days came from those lights. And we do not know if we are looking at the people who are doing this, or the people who are letting this happen, or the people who do not know this is happening. And I would rather walk to the village and find out which they are than stand on this beach and flag them down." She said, "What if they are help?" I said the help did not stop the dive boat captain from being paid to stay home for a week. She said, "I want to signal them." I said, "Peta, no." She said, "I want to." She started waving her arms. She did it before I could stop her. She put her shoes down on the sand and she stepped into the surf up to her shins, and she raised both arms over her head and she waved them. The wide, slow wave that a person on a beach uses to flag a boat. She did it for maybe 4 seconds. The lights on the water went out, not one at a time, not in sequence. All 3 at once. The triangle of 3 white lights, 2 kilometers offshore, went dark in the same instant, the way a switch is thrown. The horizon where they had been was just the horizon. The dark water and the dark sky, and the line between them and no lights at all. Peta stopped waving her arms. She stood in the surf up to her shins. She did not turn around. I said her name. "Peta." She did not answer. I said it again. She turned around slowly, and she walked out of the surf. And she picked up her shoes, and she said, in the small voice she had used in the laundry yard, "Okay, let's go to the village." We walked the rest of the way to the jetty without talking. The jetty was a long pile of dark rock that ran out into the water, maybe 60 meters long. The kind of jetty that has been there since the resort was built, and that has had concrete poured over its top by maintenance crews at various times to make it walkable. The path around the end of the jetty was a narrow strip of sand and pebble at the base of the rocks that was uncovered only at low tide, and the tide was low, the way Peta had said. We picked our way around the end of the jetty in our bare feet on the wet pebble, with our hands on the rocks to steady ourselves, and we came out on the second beach. The second beach was empty. The second beach was empty of lounge chairs, which was correct, because the second beach was not a guest beach. It was the staff beach, the small one where the staff went to swim on their afternoons off. It was empty of people, which was also correct because it was after midnight. What it was not empty of was the dive boat. The dive boat was pulled up on the sand at the far end of the second beach, beyond where the staff beach gave way to the rocks at the foot of the headland. It was the original dive boat, the one that had not been running for 4 days. I recognized it because the captain had painted the name on the bow in his own hand, in blue letters that had run a little where the brush had dripped. And I had seen the name 100 times in a year and a half. The boat was pulled up on the sand. The boat was not moving. There was no one on it. There was no one near it. The boat was just there, on the sand, on the staff beach, where the staff did not park boats and where the dive boat had never been pulled up before. I stopped walking. Peta stopped walking. I want to tell you what I thought when I saw the boat. I thought, very clearly, the boat is here because the captain was told to bring it here. I thought, the captain was told to bring it here because the boat was needed here. I thought, the boat is needed here because someone is going to use it tonight. I thought about who would use it. I thought about the man with the brown leather shoes, who had had wet toes at 6:15, which were the kind of wet toes a man gets when he walks across grass that has had the dew on it, which on this part of the island would have meant a man walking from the staff beach up across the lawn to the back service road in the early hours of the morning. I thought, he came in on this boat. I thought he had been coming in on this boat for as long as he had been here. The boat had not been not running. The boat had been running. It had been running on a schedule that was not the resort's schedule, with passengers who were not the resort's passengers, and the captain had been told to pretend the boat was not running for the guests so that the boat could be available for the other use. I thought, the boat is here because it is going to be used tonight, and the use is going to happen soon, and the use is going to be for the 40 people on the staff manifest. I thought, the 40 people on the staff manifest are going to be taken off the island on this boat. I thought, the rest of us are going to be on the island when whatever is going to happen, happens. I want to tell you that I knew, in that moment, what was going to happen on the island. I did not. I do not. I have thought about it a great deal in 2 years, and I do not know. I do not know what was in the water. I do not know what was in the food. I do not know what was in the air. I do not know whether the well was slow because something was being added to it or because something was being removed from it. I do not know whether the night delivery was food for the 40 people on the boat or for the people who were going to come to the island after. I do not know whether the lights offshore were the people who were going to come or the people who were going to leave. I do not know. I have only the things I saw. I am giving them to you in the order I saw them. Peta said, very quietly, Marisol, that is the dive boat. I said, I know. She said, the dive boat that has not been running. I said, I know. She said, why is it here? I said, I do not know. We are not going to find out. We are going to go past it. The goat path up the headland is at the far end of this beach, past the rocks. We are going to walk past the boat. We are going to walk along the sand on the side away from the boat. We are not going to look at the boat. We are going to walk to the rocks, and we are going to go up the goat path, and we are going to be in the village in 2 hours. She nodded. We walked. We were maybe 30 meters from the boat, walking along the wet sand on the water side of the beach, with the boat on our right, when the boat's deck light came on. The light was a small yellow bulb under a metal hood, the working light that the captain used when he was loading gear in the dark before a morning run. It was not bright. It lit the deck of the boat and a circle of sand maybe 3 meters across around it. The light came on, and we both stopped walking before we had decided to stop walking, the way an animal stops when a light comes on near it. And we stood on the sand, and we looked at the boat. There were people on the boat. I had not seen them before because they had been sitting on the deck, low below the gunwale, and the boat had been dark. They were sitting now in the light. There were maybe 12 of them. They were not the captain, and they were not the man with the leather shoes. They were staff. They were resort staff. They were in resort uniforms. I recognized them. I recognized Felix, the expediter from the a la carte, who had told me Tepa was off tonight. I recognized the head of housekeeping, whose name was Marin. I recognized 2 of the front desk clerks. I recognized the maitre d' from the a la carte, who had locked the front doors of the restaurant from the inside at the end of dinner service. I recognized a bartender from the main pool bar. I recognized one of the maintenance men. I recognized the head of activities, who had quietly converted the morning reef tour to a poolside snorkeling lesson for the past 2 days. I recognized Calla. Calla was sitting on a folded blanket near the bow. She was wearing street clothes. She had a small bag at her feet. She was not crying. She was not laughing. She was sitting on the blanket, the the way you sit on a blanket when you are waiting for the bus, with her hands folded in her lap, with her face turned toward the open water. She looked the way she had looked in the canteen, which was the way she always looked. She was waiting. Roman was not on the boat. I want to mark that. I want to put it down clearly. Roman was not on the boat. Calla was on the boat, and Roman was not on the boat. Calla had told me, in the canteen, that Roman had a stomach thing and would be back tomorrow. Calla had been reading from a small script. The script had said that Roman would be back tomorrow. The script had not had Roman on it. Calla had known this when she said the words. Calla had been on her way to the boat. The deck light went off. It went off the same way the lights on the water had gone off. In an instant, the switch thrown. The boat was dark again. The deck was dark. The 12 staff on the deck were dark. The beach was dark. The light had been on for maybe 4 seconds. It had been long enough to see what it had been turned on for me to see. I want to be clear about that. The light had been turned on because we had been walking past the boat, and someone on the boat had wanted to be sure I had seen who was on it. The light had not been turned on by accident. The light had been turned on to show me. I do not know who turned it on or why. I have thought about it many times. The best I have is that someone on that boat, possibly Calla, possibly Felix, possibly the head of housekeeping, possibly someone whose face I had not been able to see in the 4 seconds the light was on, had wanted me to know that I was not on the list, that the line between the people who were leaving and the people who were not leaving had been drawn somewhere I was not, and that the line had been drawn knowingly by people who knew my name. Peta said, in a voice that was not a whisper, but was as close to a whisper as her voice could be, "Marisol." That was Calla. I said, "I know." She said, "That was Felix." I said, "I know." She said, "That was Marin." I said, "Peta, I know." Walk. We walked. We did not look at the boat again. We walked along the wet sand toward the rocks at the far end of the beach. The goat path up the headland began at a notch between 2 large rocks at the base of the cliff. And it was steep, and it was bad, and it had been there for longer than the resort. And we found it because Peta had been up it 3 times with the maintenance men, who used it as a shortcut to the village to buy cigarettes. We started up the path. The path was loose dirt and small rocks and tree roots, and it climbed steeply through scrub, and we used our hands as much as our feet. We did not stop. We did not look back at the beach. We climbed. We were maybe 2/3 of the way up the headland, with the resort below us on the far side of the rocks, when we heard the dive boat's engine start. The engine was a heavy diesel that we both knew, because we'd both heard it 1,000 times in a year and a half, leaving the dock at 6 in the morning for the reef. It started. It idled for a moment. The pitch deepened as the boat was put into reverse and pulled off the sand. The pitch changed again as the boat was put forward and turned toward open water. We could not see the boat from where we were on the path because the trees were in the way, but we could hear it, and we listened to it as we climbed, and the sound of it moved out across the water, away from the beach in the direction of where the 3 lights had been, and after a few minutes, the sound of it grew smaller, and after a few minutes more, it was gone. We came over the top of the headland. The village was below us on the other side, a small cluster of low houses and one larger building that was the church, with a single street running through it, with a few lights on in the windows even at 1 in the morning. We sat down on the rocks at the top of the headland to catch our breath. Peta was crying. I was not crying. I do not know why I was not crying. I I think I had run out of crying down on the beach. I sat on the rocks and I looked at the village below, and I thought about the people on the boat. I thought about Calla, who had been my friend, who I had eaten with in the canteen for a year and a half, who had taught me how to mix 3 cocktails that the bar manager had not bothered to teach me. I thought about Felix, who had run the pass at the a la carte, the way no one else could run it, who had once given me an extra portion of fish off the line because he could see I was hungry and the dinner break was over. I thought about Marin, who had been kind to me when I had come into the laundry one night crying after a bad shift, who had given me a clean towel and a cup of tea, and had sat with me until I could go back to my dormitory. I thought about these people, and I thought about the fact that they had known for a week or longer that something was going to happen on the property, and that they had known the names on the list, and that they had not told me, and that they had not told the dormitory, and that they had not told the guests, and that they had sat on the deck of the dive boat in their street clothes with their small bags at their feet and waited to be taken off the island, and that one of them had reached up and turned on the deck light for 4 seconds so that I would see them, so that I would know that I had been on the wrong side of a line that they had been on the right side of, and that the turning on of the light was the most kindness any of them had shown me in the last week, because the light had been my warning, my real warning, the one I could not pretend I had not received. I want to tell you what we did next. We walked down into the village. We went to the small dock where the village ferry tied up. We sat under the awning of the closed fish market, and we waited for the ferry. The ferry came at 6 a.m. We bought 2 tickets in cash. We got on the ferry. We sat in the back. We did not speak to anyone. We crossed to the mainland in 3 hours. We got off the ferry. We walked to the bus station. We bought tickets to the city where my mother lived, because it was the city I knew, because Peta did not have a city and was willing to come with me to mine. We took the bus. We arrived at my mother's apartment at 4 p.m. My mother opened the door. She looked at me. She did not ask why I was there. She made us food. She let Peta sleep in my old room. I slept on the couch. The next morning I called the resort. The resort's main line did not answer. I called the corporate office of the company that owned the resort. The corporate office told me that the resort had been temporarily closed due to a contamination incident in the water supply, that all guests had been evacuated, that all staff had been accounted for, that no one had been seriously harmed, and that the resort would reopen within 4 weeks under enhanced safety protocols. The woman on the phone read this to me from what I am sure was a script that she had been given that morning. I asked her what the contamination had been. She said she was not authorized to release that information. I asked her if she could connect me to the resident manager. She said that the resident manager was currently unavailable. I asked for the name of the resident manager. She said the name. The name she said was not Henrik. The name she said was a name I did not know. I asked her about Henrik. I said his full name. She said that she did not have any record of an employee by that name at the resort. I said it again. She said again that she did not have any record. I asked her about the head of housekeeping. I said Marin's full name. She said that she did not have any record. I asked her about Felix. The same. I asked her about Calla. The same. I asked her about myself. I said my full name. She said yes. The woman on the phone said, "You are on the staff list. You were on shift on the night of the incident. You are currently listed as a no-call, no-show, and your employment has been terminated, and you may be subject to penalties under the terms of your contract for abandoning your post during an emergency." She said this in a voice that was not unkind. She said this in the voice of a person who had been given a list of names and a list of statuses, and was reading the status next to each name. The status next to my name was no call, no show. The status next to the others was no record. I said thank you. I hung up. I have not gone back. I have not contacted the resort or the company. Peta stayed with me for 3 months and then went home to her village. I see her every few months. We do not talk about the resort. We have agreed not to. I work in a restaurant in the city now. I make less than I made on the island. I do not send my mother money in the same way I did. The jar in her kitchen is the same weight it was 2 years ago. I have learned to live with that. I read the news about the island sometimes. There's not been any news. The resort reopened under a different name, the way I said. The guests who were there on the night I left have not, as far as I can find, reported anything. I've searched for their names, the ones I remember. The older man at the pool bar who joked about the reef. He is alive. I found his profile online. He has continued to post pictures of his grandchildren. He posted a picture of himself 2 months after the night I left, in a different country, on a different beach, smiling. He looked the way he had looked at my bar. He looked exactly the way he had looked. I have looked at the picture for a long time, and I have not been able to tell whether it is him. I think about the people I did not wake. I want to tell you that I think about Inez and Selma and the 4 other women I walked past in the dormitory, and that I have built, over 2 years, some peace with what I did. I have not. I have built, instead, a small set of habits that allow me to function. I do not work in places that have dormitories. I do not work in places that have a staff manifest. I do not work in places where one manager runs everything, and where the supply chain is opaque, and where the boats that come and go are operated by people I have never met. I work in a small restaurant in a city with 100 restaurants like it, where the supplier delivers in the morning with a logo on the truck, and the owner is in the kitchen at the same time as the staff, and there is no list. I have made the world I work in small. I have made it small because I've learned that I am the kind of person who walks past 16 sleeping women without waking them, and I do not want to be in a place again where that kind of choice is available to me. I will tell you the last thing, and I will be done. 2 weeks ago, I was finishing a shift at the restaurant in the city. I was wiping down the bar at the end of the night. The owner had gone home. The cook had gone home. The dishwasher was running in the back. I was alone in the front of the restaurant. The phone on the wall behind the bar rang. I picked it up. I said the name of the restaurant. A woman's voice on the other end said my name. She said Marisol. She said it the way Calla used to say it. She said, Marisol, it's Calla. I did not say anything. I stood with the phone against my ear. She said, Marisol, are you there? I have been trying to find you. I want you to know that we did not know. I want you to know that none of us knew, until that night, what was going to happen. I want you to know that the people on the boat were taken too. I want you to know that I am sorry. I want you to come back. There is a list now of the people who got off the island. The list is small. You are on it. I have been told to tell you that you are on it. There is a place for you with us. We need someone like you. I have been told to ask you. I am asking you. Will you come? I stood with the phone against my ear and I listened to her voice. The voice was Calla's voice. The voice was exactly Calla's voice. In the way the wave that we used between staff was exactly the wave that we used between staff. I could not tell from the voice whether she was reading from a script or not. I could not tell whether the words were her words or words that someone had given her to say. I could not tell whether the people on the boat had been taken or whether they had not been taken. I could not tell whether the list she was talking about was a real list or a list that someone wanted me to believe was a list. I could not tell, and I am the person I am. And I had 2 years of being the person I am behind me. And I have learned what I do when I cannot tell. I said into the phone, "I'm sorry, you have the wrong number." I said it the way you say it to a stranger. I hung up the phone. I finished wiping the bar. I turned off the lights. I locked the front door of the restaurant from the inside. I walked home through the streets of the city, which were busy even at midnight, with people going home from other restaurants and people going to clubs, and a man selling roasted corn from a cart in the warm, noisy life of a place where there is no list and no boat and no manifest and no warehouse. I went up the 4 flights of stairs to my apartment. I lay down on my bed in my clothes. I did not sleep. I lay there for a long time, and I thought about what she had said. "I want you to come back. There is a place for you with us. We need someone like you." I thought about the fact that the line between the people who had been on the boat and the people who had not been on the boat had been a line drawn by people who knew me, who had decided whether or not to include me, and that someone, somewhere, was now offering to draw a different line around me, on a different list, with the same letter or a different letter, and that the offer was open, and that I could take it, and that if I took it, I would be on the inside of something I did not understand, with people I had known and could no longer trust, in a place I could not find on a map, for a purpose I would not be told. I did not take it. I will not take it. I want to tell you that the not taking is a kind of redemption, that the not taking is the small good thing I have done that balances against the 16 women I did not wake. It is not. The not taking is exactly the same thing I have been doing for 2 years. I do not wake people. I do not pick up phones. I do not go back. I have made the world small, and I am keeping it small, and I am alone in it, and the smallness is what I have, instead of the women I did not wake. And it is not a trade that I made well, and it is not a trade I can undo. The phone at the restaurant has not rung again. I am waiting for it to ring. I do not know what I will say if it does. I have been thinking about it for 2 weeks. I do not know what I will say. I hope it does not ring. I hope it rings. I do not know which I hope more. The lights in the city are on. The street outside my window is loud. There's a man laughing somewhere down the block. There's a radio playing in another apartment. The world is the world. I am in it. I am still in it. That is the thing I have. That is the only thing I have.